Okay, we will call the October 2nd meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Can we start with the roll call, please?
Andres Spinelli.
Here.
Jared Gardner.
Here.
Radhika Krishna. Here. Jim Winchester.
Here.
Scott Poulos.
Here.
Randy Eber.
Here.
Daniel George.
Here.
Greg Strike.
Here.
Jeff Ron is excused. You have a quorum. Thank you.
Okay, would anyone be interested in making a motion to reorder the agenda? Motion by Commissioner Poulos, seconded by Commissioner Strike. Do you like to state your motion?
I move to reorder the agenda to hear public hearing item G3 before G1 and G2.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes. Okay. A motion to approve the minutes? Moved by Commissioner Poulos, seconded by Commissioner Strike. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Any objections? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Are there any disclosures? Hearing none, I do have some disclosures, so I will hand over the gavel. And in the matter of case or resolution 2023-013, I will be recused. I did not participate in that case. And I am the petitioner in cases 2023-0096 and 2023-0097, and will recuse myself from those cases.
Thank you. I'll just put on the record that we don't need to have a vote directing Andre to participate, but I will put on the record that since he has a direct conflict, he'll be recused from those cases.
Okay, gavel is back. Motion to approve the consent. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Ebert.
I was absent from the meeting on 9/11, so they're abstained from the consent agenda.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Commissioner Winchester, seconded by Commissioner Gardner. Anyone wishing to pull any items for discussion? Hearing none, if no objections, the consent agenda is approved. All right, we will move on to the public hearings. The procedure by which the public may speak to the commission at its meetings is, 1, after staff presentation is complete on public hearing items, the chair will ask the public for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limit established in the commission rules and procedures. A, the petitioner, including all his or her representatives, 10 minutes. Part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. B, representatives of groups, community councils, PTAs, etc., will receive 5 minutes. C, individuals receive 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the commission. Any party of interest wishing to appeal shall first file with the planning director within 7 days of the commission's decision made on the record a written notice of intent to appeal in accordance with AMC 2103-050A4A. Commission recommendations to the Anchorage Assembly are not appealable. Okay. Can we have staff's presentation on case 2023-0108?
Yes, thank you, Chair Spinelli. I'm just going to quickly review the origin of this case for the Planning and Zoning Commission because the topic should look familiar. So the initial parking and site access code amendments went before the Planning and Zoning Commission. Then the Assembly created an S version to address the parking. The S version was adopted by the Assembly with AO 2022-80S. This did not go back before the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Assembly did send the site access portion of the proposed code amendments back to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Then those were adopted with AO 2023-50. So this case, 2023-0108, serves as a cleanup to those two already adopted changes. So again, the parking and site access original ordinances are a done deal and past the appeal period at the Assembly. And so this case is meant as a cleanup that would include clarifications, corrections, unfinished provisions, or fixes of unintended consequences from those two ordinances. Some are technical amendments and some are substantive changes in response to unintended consequences, but again, all are just corrective in nature and not an entirely new topic. Please reference page 2 of the staff report for a summary of these cleanup amendments, and please also reference the supplemental recommended amendments. Those recommend some additional technical changes as well as amendments that respond to comments we received from traffic engineering. The department recommends an approval recommendation to the Assembly subject to amendments 1 through 6 in the supplemental memorandum. Tom Davis and I are here on behalf of the department for any questions from commissioners tonight. Thank you.
Are there any questions of staff? Well, I have one question, I guess. On the 2190 section, I was reading through the code section in the original packet, and it appears that there still are off-street guest parking requirements, and I was just questioning if that's correct.
Chair Spinelli, could you clarify for me? So you're saying in a certain section,
Section 11, 2190.005, it appears that the table's in place, and so there's still a certain number of guest parking spaces required per dwelling unit, is my impression.
Chair Spinelli, those are on-street spaces. So they're not, there's still no off-street parking requirement, but those would be on-street requirements.
So then there are, it's like the secret place where there still are parking requirements?
I wouldn't say that there still are no off-street parking requirements. I guess we are recommending the use-specific standard for a few specific uses. For instance, the loading zone for childcare and adult care facilities, and then for auto repair where they have to have a space to store their vehicles. Here, this section would apply to multiple dwelling unit residential development on a single lot or tract. And I guess there's still no on-street requirement for guests, or sorry, off-street requirement for spaces. Yeah, so I don't feel it's like gaming the system, I suppose. Yeah, I don't know if, I'll see if Tom has anything to add for this one.
Yes, this is the existing requirement for the street design of what we call site condominium developments, where you have multiple homes or duplexes on a large parcel or a parcel of land, and so they're creating private streets. Typically in these developments, you often have the homes and homes and buildings closer to one another, and so the driveways are closer to one another, and historically, typically the problem became that there wasn't any place for guests to park on the street like you would in a platted neighborhood. So this is an existing requirement, and what's changing here is that the existing requirement had reached back to the minimum parking requirements back in Chapter 7 of Title 21 for the specifics on how many guest spaces to require with the street. When that was deleted by the parking ordinance last year, that specific requirement, the specifics of the requirement identifying how much parking was required went away. So this is simply adding back the specific amount of parking required to this existing requirement off in AMCR 2190.
So I guess a follow-up, since this body wasn't necessarily privy to the elimination of parking requirements, can I just clarify for my understanding that parking's no longer required anywhere in the city except for in residential multiple dwellings on a single lot?
I think Elizabeth identified a couple of examples where it is still required for other uses. In this case, there's no off-street parking requirement for these developments for the multiple units on a lot. This on-street requirement was not deleted by the big parking ordinance last year. It is specifically responding to characteristics in the design of site condominium developments, which make them somewhat, have their own characteristics that sometimes differ from residential developments that are platted with, public streets.
All right, thank you. I won't take up any more time on this. question from Commissioner Krishna.
So off-street accessible spaces are still required?
Commissioner Krishna, through the chair, yes. Accessible ADA spaces are still required, and actually that ordinance, the Assembly increased the requirements. So this was in the supplemental memorandum. This was a comment we received from traffic engineering to change. So the ADA spaces were increased above federal minimums, but traffic engineering has found that in some cases for usually large parking lots, this has greatly increased the number of ADA accessible spaces. So this cleanup amendment offers a path where the developer could still provide the federal minimum and then get permission from the traffic engineer not to provide the additional ADA accessible spaces that were required by the Assembly. So I hope that makes sense. In summary, the Assembly increased the ADA requirements above the federal minimum. This cleanup amendment offers approval by the traffic engineer for a developer to still put the federal minimum if it makes sense for the parking lot layout and is justified.
Thank you, and I have a follow-up if that's okay. Sticking with the supplemental packet, could you talk a little bit about the passenger loading zone requirement that the planning department on advice from traffic engineering is looking to restore, and why specifically the use of child care centers with more than 15 children and adult care facilities was chosen as the only use that loading zone requirement would be restored for?
Yes, Tom Davis, I can respond to that. So the passenger loading zone requirement for the child care center and the adult care center uses, it actually still is a requirement. It's off in the passenger loading zone section of the parking requirements. And similar to the case with the on-street parking spaces for the site condominium, the standard still exists in that section, but that section depended on the now deleted minimum parking requirements table from that was deleted last year. It depended on that to show how many spaces, passenger loading zone spaces dedicated for passenger loading were required. So you have a requirement, basically says they're required, but it doesn't say how much anymore. And so what traffic engineering has requested is that for those two particular uses, the table of minimum parking requirements that was deleted, it provided specific amounts, ground rules for how much. And so this is proposing to restore those ground rules for how much to provide, I guess, clarity. And those were the only two uses, I think, that were identified as having had those specific requirements. I think schools and a few other big uses didn't have a specified number, but they're also required.
Commissioner Pullis.
Can we go over real quick one more time why we think we should override traffic on a 20-foot parking stall? I read it a couple times, but I'm kind of the opinion it should stay 20 feet. So I'd like to hear it from you guys one more time, please.
So Commissioner Pullis, through the chair, the Assembly created, I'm looking at page 4 on the supplemental amendment page in table 1. So as adopted, we're already at an 18-foot. You are correct, the request from traffic engineering was to restore the 20-foot. The rationale the planning department used to keep to go to the 19-foot is in table 2, where it would still fit most of the fleet. It's really only the largest pickup model, so you could still just fit an F-150 or an Expedition as an example, or Tacoma. It's just those large pickup models that might end up sticking out a little bit. So I suppose the rationale was that we would still fit almost all of the vehicles except for those few. And then it was also based upon comparisons to what other cities have for their spaces. And we didn't really find that most had the 20-foot stall. And I'll let Tom give any additional background information I may have missed in that response.
I think Elizabeth basically covered it. I mean, the overall is just really a choice between, there's no perfect number, and then it's just a matter of priorities. And so the 20-foot stall really is like the engineering style look at it, like worst case scenario, we're going to engineer for the worst case scenario. We're going to make sure that nearly all vehicles fit always. And the 19-foot stall is balancing that policy objective to make sure all vehicles fit with the objective to try and avoid wasting land, wasting space, and so it's trying to accommodate the majority of vehicles instead of trying to accommodate all size classes. And this whole change is in the context of the site access and parking ordinances did provide greater opportunity for smaller parking spaces. It provided an 18-foot for low turnover uses with low parking turnover, like residences or offices where people aren't moving in and out all the time and are banging each other's cars with each other's doors all day. But what we found here is that, we focused on what could simplify this to the least worst number that tries to capture or balance the objectives between being efficient and accommodating large vehicles. And in the table on page 4, this is table 2, in the lower right corner there's a really dark green. So we didn't like seeing a lot of waste of land any more than we didn't like seeing cars not fit. So it's really a no perfect choice, just a policy choice.
Okay, we have questions popping up. Commissioner Strike.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. And thank you for the explanation. I'm still not sold on the deviating from the 20-foot. We talk about looking at sister cities, looking at comparison, looking at what they've gone through, but without going into which cities those were, do they have winter conditions? Do they have snow? Do they have the same snow removal issues that doesn't take place immediately? Do they have snow plows on these trucks that add extensions? Do they have the extensive trailer hitches and so forth that also accompany these that can extend out anywhere from 6 to 9 inches further? All of these land into the parking requirements and seeing what works in a general overall type of weather environment conditions. And what we end up seeing is that trucks end up backing in, and they back in right to the curb. Now they've got about 3 feet overhanging into the sidewalk, into the pedestrian way in some cases. So there's always there's workarounds when these areas are too short. The 20-foot, I believe, is conducive still to the type of vehicular traffic and size of vehicles that we're seeing, especially when we take into consideration the winter conditions. So I got off my soapbox, but winter conditions, what do you think?
Yeah, we looked at the other cities primarily for context, because many of those ordinances are rather old, and we're trying to design our ordinance to fit a modern vehicle fleet. So for example, Fairbanks has an 18-foot stall, and Homer, Alaska has a 19-foot stall. I think you can get away with 15-foot stalls or 16-foot stalls in Seattle. Just varies. We translated meters to feet when we looked at Edmonton, but we really did, as a primary source, try to figure out what would work here in Anchorage, and that was at Table 2. And then the Table 1 showed different policy options. We looked at, okay, can we go with the 20 feet still and allow a certain percentage to have a much smaller compact space size? And we still have a lot of cars in Anchorage that I was surprised to find the RAV4 is only like 15 feet long, and a lot of cars are only 15 feet long. And so the 20-foot stall was leaving 4 feet on the table. So we looked at a variety of options, and that was the 19 where we came up with. But for winter, it is more difficult in the wintertime. We acknowledge that in Anchorage.
Commissioner George.
Thank you. Thank you, through the chair. I guess maybe, I don't know, I hope I'm not overthinking this, but the first thing that occurs to me is if you've got a vehicle that is sticking out into the right-of-way through a parking area, it doesn't matter if they're all 15 or 16-foot vehicles and you've got one that's 20, it's going to be real tough to plow around that vehicle regardless. Uniformity, if you make all the stalls 19 feet, that 20-foot vehicle is not going to fit in, obviously, any of those easily. It's not like you really save space. Another thing that occurred to me is, a lot of parking lots, when you restripe it, you have a lot of the spaces that are facing each other without a barrier in the middle. And so what you'll likely end up with is vehicles that are too long will just pull forward and occupy essentially 2 spaces at that point. And then also in Alaska, it's for someone who's got an F-250 or a Tundra or F-350, folks have those vehicles oftentimes for purposes that they use them for. So you're likely to have grill guards, moose bumpers, hitches on the back. So the effective length of those vehicles is oftentimes more than just the manufacturer length, and I just maybe urge consideration of that. Thank you.
Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you. I have what I think is maybe just a quick clarification with respect to the traffic engineering comments. I'm looking at the summary on page 3, where it says traffic recommends returning to a 20-foot standard. Its second choice would be to live with the recently adopted 18-foot standard. I'm assuming there's no implication there that traffic has any concerns with the 19 feet relative to the 18 feet that planning is proposing? In other words, if traffic had to choose between the 20 foot and the 19, it would take the 19 and not go all the way back down to the 18.
Probably.
Okay.
They had trouble with the odd number, but I thought, well, 9-foot width is an odd number. What's wrong with 19? So, but I would tend to guess that you were probably correct there.
All right, yeah. I don't mean to make you speak for traffic. I just wasn't sure if the way that was written suggested that there had been some discussion with them about 19 that suggested otherwise, but thank you.
Commissioner Pullis.
I just want to kind of end this conversation with a summary of how I think no parking is going to work out in this town. Everybody knows there's going to be some parking. You don't build these developments with no parking. Even the developers are still going to put in some parking. I think it's going to be like a third to a half of the old required parking would probably be a good guess of what they'll build. So reducing parking stalls 1 foot to save 4 feet on a lot where we just got rid of a half of whatever required parking there was, 20 foot seems like a small compensation for all that in the big picture of things. So I think in the end, I don't know if it's time to say what we're going to say, but I would probably want to keep it at 20 feet. I'm done.
After the public hearing, you can make motions. Okay, seeing no more questions, we will open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to testify, please come forward. Yes, this case. I do not believe anyone wished to testify, so we will close the public hearing. Does staff have anything like to add? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Commissioner Spinelli, I don't think I have anything else to add. I guess just, again, to summarize that the site access and parking ordinances were adopted, and these are meant to be a cleanup of the consequences of the adoption of those ordinances. That's all I have to say further.
I guess if you had specific instructions for my fellow commissioners on how you would proceed and move forward, you might add that in right now.
Commissioner Spinelli, I believe Lori may have, I believe there may be some language prepared as part of our recommendation, but in essence, it would be you're making a recommendation to the Assembly about these code amendments. The Planning Department's position is to recommend approval subject to the amendments 1 through 6 that we identified in the supplemental amendment memorandum.
Thank you.
And I guess I'll add, Commissioner Spinelli, if there's any other clarifications of motions commissioners want to make, staff would be happy to help out. But that's the department's position and recommendation for the Planning and Zoning Commission's motion.
Okay. Now, can we close the public hearing? What's the will of the body? We have a motion by Commissioner Gardner, seconded by Commissioner Winchester. Would you like to state your motion?
Yes, thanks. I move in case 2023-0108 to recommend to the Anchorage Assembly approval of the Title 21 Parking and Site Access Cleanup Text Amendments, subject to conditions 1 through 6, shown on pages 4 through 8 of the staff supplemental memorandum.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, just generally, I think these amendments do a good job of identifying areas that require some cleanup in light of the recent assembly ordinances relating to the parking and changing the parking requirements. And I think they do so in a way that is kind of consistent, with the intent and philosophy of those ordinances.
Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Commissioner Polis.
I don't think I intend to support the motion without 20-foot parking stalls. I was going to try and sneak a motion into, recommend that they keep 20-foot parking stalls. So that's where I'm at on the current motion.
Perhaps you would like to make a motion to amend.
I would like to make a motion to I would like make a motion to amend and add the recommendation that the assembly vote to keep the 20-foot parking stall length. I don't know if I did that right, but I tried.
Okay, we have a motion to amend and add the recommendation to the assembly to vote to keep 20-foot parking stalls, seconded by Commissioner Eber. Mr. Pulis, Commissioner Pulis, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I think I'll just repeat what I said earlier in that, I think how things are going to develop with a third to half of what the parking stall requirement used to be, that keeping the 20-foot stall length to save 4 feet doesn't seem like as big a deal anymore, and it's just more accommodating to all the users, and it's just not a huge sacrifice when we know the parking areas are going to get smaller. So,
Commissioner Strike.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. I would like to also add to the comments that this is also consistent with the traffic engineer's intention and advice as well.
Anyone else wishing to speak? I think I will add that I do not intend to support the motion because the assembly saw the need to eliminate parking requirements altogether. As a developer, think I'm going to build the appropriate amount of parking with the right amount of space, but I don't think that I need the code telling me how to do it. So I do not intend to support the amendment. Call for the vote. That vote failed. We are back to the main motion. Okay, we have Commissioner George in the queue.
Thank you. Through the chair, I don't know if I can ask a question to the department just to clarify something real quick. The chair raised earlier the question of private development parking requirements, that the requirement still exists in code, but that we're simply reinserting what used to be in that table. Can you just verify on behalf of the department that what's being reinserted is exactly what was there before?
It'll take just a second.
Thank you. My intention is to clarify that we're not changing what a previous policy was. We're not quickly trying to reevaluate the needs and place another value there. Thank you.
I have to find the old Title 21. I know that they were intended to be as close as possible, but I believe there was a technical adjustment. So we're going to have to dive into the old Title 21 here for just a second here and get that answer for you. All right, so I'm going to go to the parking amendment. I'm going to this PZC public hearing draft. Briefing from mayor. Oh, man. to OnBase packets. And there it is. I'm loading up to Chapter 7 amendment. All right, there it is, yeah. Okay.
So I opened up, are you in 2022-ES? Because that shows what needed.
Brief at ease. I don't know if we do those here, or if we just stay on record.
See, for a multifamily dwelling with single-family, two-family construction, it's the same. For multifamily,
Gotta stay on record.
other developments, it's 10. And for multifamily dwelling with townhouse-style construction, it is 0.15. 0.15. Looks like the same.
Yeah.
It's the same.
Thank you.
Okay, we have the main motion on the table. Is anyone wishing to speak to the motion? Hearing none, we will call for the vote. The motion passes. And with that, I will hand over the gavel and recuse myself from the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Spinelli. All right, we'll keep moving. Would anyone like to make a motion to combine cases 96 and 97? Moved by Commissioner Strike, seconded by Commissioner George. Is there any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, those cases are combined and the time allotted for testimony is doubled. May we go ahead and hear the staff's presentation?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Madam Chair. So with the first case, these two related cases, the packet labeled G1, Page 10 of that packet shows the location of the petition site at the northeast corner of Elim Street and Abbott Road. This is a request to change the Anchorage 2040 land use designation for 3 lots to town center. Currently, Anchorage 2040 land use plan map designates these lots as compact mixed residential medium, residential mixed use development, and transit supportive development corridor. These 3 designations support upzoning these lots from the R5 district to the R2M, R3, or R3A districts. The R2M and the R3 districts are multifamily residential districts. The R3A is a multifamily residential district that also allows a proportion of non-residential uses on the same property, residential with either community use or a commercial use. The applicant's request for a comprehensive plan amendment would allow a corresponding rezone from the R5 district to the B3 general business district. The planning department doesn't support the comprehensive plan amendment to town center or the rezone to B as in business 3 district. The applicant provided a resolution of support from the Abbott Loop Community Council. That's on page 44 of your packet. The Abbott Loop Community Council adopted a resolution supporting both the applicant's request for a comprehensive plan amendment to town center and the rezone to B3, B meaning business B3 district. So I'll go through the approval criteria for a comprehensive plan amendment first. So approval criteria A, Romanet 1, believe the planning department finds that the approval criteria is not met. We've stated in the staff recommendation that the plan designates the existing residential district as compact mixed residential medium, residential mixed use, and transit supportive development, which have the R2M, R3, and R3A districts as implementing zoning districts. The compact mixed residential medium designation is characterized by multi-unit apartment buildings and townhouses. The residential mixed-use development designation promotes medium to high-density housing and mixed use, which is residential and non-residential on the same site. Anchorage 2040 states housing remains essential. The goal of this feature is to retain and grow our local housing capacity, not erode the residentially zoned land supply. The transit supportive development designation is given to street corridors that are intended to have high ridership demand to support more frequent bus service. These areas need compact housing with 8 to 20 housing units per acre. The R2M, R3, and R3A districts are critical multifamily residential districts to meet Anchorage's housing needs on transit corridors like Abbott Road. Greater housing density at this location is a high community need. Anchorage 2040 states that Anchorage will need 21,000 new residential units by 2040. Assuming that existing residential zoning is developed with residential, there will still be a housing gap of 7,900 residential units. Converting residentially zoned land to commercial increases that housing gap. The need to retain existing residential zoning and increase residential density in appropriate locations like Abbott Road is well documented in Anchorage 2040. This existing residential neighborhood is identified to be upzoned to greater residential density to address the shortage of housing in Anchorage. The applicant's request would do the opposite by removing land from the residential category, thereby exacerbating the housing shortage. With regard to Romanet 3, the department finds it's not met. There have been no changes to the policies, objectives, and principles, standards governing this parcel or the proposed use, the need to retain existing housing land base is more critical than ever. Romanet 4, the 2012 Anchorage housing market analysis showed the need to retain residential land designations, especially multifamily residential designations. This is particularly important for the creation of rental housing, which is associated with housing affordability. Approval criteria B is not met. Rezones from residential districts to the B3 district results in a net loss of residential units. While the B3 district allows residential development, it's rare. The B3 is typically developed with straight commercial. The applicant's request is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. The shortage of residential land in the Anchorage Bowl makes it imperative that no residential land be converted to commercial unless specifically called out in the comprehensive plan. Residential Policy 14 and Anchorage 2040 make this clear. Approval criteria C is not met. If this site were rezoned to the R3 district in accordance with Anchorage 2040, then there's a potential for 25 housing units to be developed at the site. That's because the R3 allows up to 40 dwelling units per acre. Changing the land use designation to compact mixed residential medium, from compact mixed residential medium to town center results in a loss of approximately 0.64 acres of residential land, not including the domino effect of other rezones that may occur in this area. Approval criteria D is not met. The request is not consistent with Anchorage 2040 Land Use Policy 4.1, which states, quote, provide sufficient land to meet the diverse housing needs of Anchorage's citizens where the integrity of the residential neighborhood area is protected from expanding commercial corridors and non-neighborhood employment activities. And then Anchorage 2020 Policy 14, conservation of residential lands for housing is a high community priority. New residential development at densities less than identified in the neighborhood or district plans is discouraged. No regulatory action under Title 21 shall result in the conversion of dwelling units or residentially zoned property to commercial or industrial unless it's consistent with an adopted plan. And the last one's approval criteria E, and it's not met. The locational description, it says that areas of the town center designation is for areas, the intersection of arterial streets and Elam is a local road. So the department's not supporting the comprehensive plan amendment. I'll turn now to the rezone packet. That's your G2. I want to point out that we received 3 public comments, and they're in your supplemental packets I'm holding up to just show. And 2 of the public comments were in favor of the comprehensive plan amendment and rezone, and 1 is opposed to the rezone. So Spinell Homes is requesting with a second case, to rezone 3 lots from R5 low-density residential to B3 general business district. And none of the reviewing agencies have any objection to the rezone. Of course, the applicant provided a resolution of support from Avalon Community Council. That's on page 46 of your packet. The staff recommendation goes through the approval criteria and does not support this rezone to B3. The rezone to B3 is likely to result in a loss of housing and create a domino effect of rezones of other neighboring lots. So on page 7 of the packet, the department does not support, doesn't believe the approval criteria is met and doesn't support the rezone from R5 to B3. A couple sort of housekeeping items to go over. Findings for rezones, there's something particular that I want to point out to the commission. So code states in the rezone section under action of the Planning and Zoning Commission, it states the commission, that's you guys, shall include written findings based on each of the approval criteria. The Planning and Zoning Commission shall supplement any denial recommendation with a summary of critical issues related to the application based upon public input and the commission's deliberations. This information will be available to assist the assembly if the ordinance is submitted under a different subsection. So just to summarize, the way I think of it is to just make good findings. It's particularly important as stated in code here. And then there's another thing in code I wanted to point out on the following page. It has to do with prejudice, without prejudice thing. So code states, following denial of a rezone request, no new application for the same or substantially the same rezone shall be accepted within 2 years of the date of denial, unless denial is made without prejudice. What I would recommend is, if the commission recommends approval, then you can ignore this section. But if the commission were to recommend denial of the rezone, that if you didn't want the applicant to be able to reapply for the same or substantially the same application for 2 years, then you'd say with prejudice. Recommends denial with prejudice would make them have this waiting period. This is sort of higher order thinking for planners, but I hope that I was able to explain that well enough. I don't have anything else to add, so I'd be happy to answer your questions, and thank you for your time.
Are there questions for staff? Commissioner Eber?
Yeah, I do have some question on, I'm looking at page 33 where the MOA zoning map is, and it shows that the lots adjacent to it are all, not all, besides the R5 piece, but B3SL or B3SL or B3SL. So with my expertise in appraising and looking at code, typically when things are special limitations, they have been either rezoned from some other prior zoning, usually residential, or they have some sort of special limitations. Do you know in particular like why those, or what those special limitations are, or if they have been rezoned from previous residential lots?
Yes, thanks for the question. I didn't look up the special limitations on the Abbott Loop Fred Meyers. But yeah, everything south of Abbott Road is that B3SL, but it's, it's the big commercial mall site. Across Elim Street from this parcel is the photography studio. And I included the ordinance that approved that rezone to RO SL. And so I can actually point to the special limitations on that one. That's on page 60 of your packet G1, the first case. And I also have it on the back of I think the rezone case too. But so in 2003, the Assembly adopted an ordinance rezoning the property from R5 to ROSL, and the special limitations were one, resolving access with the municipal traffic engineer prior to the issuance of building permits, and two, was providing and maintaining a 10-foot planted screening easement on the south and east property lines wherever the site abuts a residential zone. So they were trying to deal with the traffic concerns on a residential street, and looks like sort of like buffering to the residential neighbors. That was approved by the Assembly in 2003. In the the following pages, you can see that the Assembly memorandum or informational memorandum, the Planning Department recommended denial of this, and the Commission recommended denial. Their resolution is on page 65. So the commission back then recommended denial, and they go through the reasons why they recommended denial, and it was about protection of the existing residential neighborhood, and what was it? They didn't want a new strip commercial that on the north side of Abbott Road that was not in any adopted plan. And then the other B3SL that you might be referring to is that medical office building, kind of like near McDonald's. I don't think I know I don't have those special limitations in these packets. I apologize. That was another rezone from residential to commercial. So I think it's B3SL, and it was, I believe, R5 when it was rezoned.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Commissioner George?
Thank you, through the chair. I know we still have to listen to the public testimony on this one, and I just want to make sure I understand on attachment N, there's a table of comparisons for zoning. I just want to verify my understanding is correct, that by going from R5 zoning to B3, we would be increasing the maximum height of structures from 30 feet to 45. Is that correct?
Through the chair, I think it's, it's a good question. Let me follow up. In chapter 6, it has the dimensional standards, and the R5, which allows duplexes on 13,000 square foot lots, and it also allows single family homes and mobile homes. The maximum height allowed in the R5 district is 30 feet, and the B3 allows by right 45 feet, and I go into some discussion about you can go higher with an admin site plan review, and then you can go much higher with the conditional use permit. And the B3 has pretty small setbacks too.
Thank you.
Commissioner Winchester?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that B3 could have a residential component equal to or even greater than the current R5. Is that correct?
The B3 district can be developed with straight multifamily residential. It can be 100% residential, or it can be 100% commercial, or any mix of the two. It's a lot of flexibility. Yeah.
And then you included attached case 2003-006 in both packets. And then there's item 14. It's on page 67, G1. Seems to me the commission pointed out that if they combined lots or came back as a town center plan, that maybe they would consider rezoning this to B3, and that kind of sounds like what's being done here. Can you just talk about item number 14 on page 67? See, is it applicable in this instance, or is it only referring to spot zoning?
Yeah, I think that what you're saying is correct. There's some similarities. I also read the minutes from this meeting, but you know, it's a lot of pages, and so I didn't include that. It was a while back. The photography studio was just a rezone of one lot. I don't know what the square footage of it, like 10 or 12,000 or something like that. This is deeper, 3 lots. And so if the photography studio had come in with that, maybe they would have supported it at the time, per this finding. That's kind of you making guesses and placing our heads back then. I think that the overriding finding from the commission back then was this policy 21 of Anchorage 2020, which said rezoning of property to commercial is only permitted when designated in an adopted plan. It wasn't designated in an adopted plan back then, and now it's definitely not. And then also new strip commercial is strongly discouraged. The issue, or what has changed between then and now is Anchorage 2040 land use plan map has been adopted. Right in the first page in the preface, the first page and then the second page, it says that Anchorage 2040 supersedes Anchorage 2020 and is more specific than Anchorage 2020. And it designates, it gives a designation of this land, whereas before it was undesignated. The land use plan map, the generalized 1982 plan, did not designate that land for anything at the time. And then it foresaw that there would be a plan that one day would. Well, we have that plan now, and it says this shall be upzoned to R2M, R3, or R3A. That's why they must amend the plan for these 3 lots to town center in order for a rezone, in order for the rezone to happen.
Seeing no other questions for staff, may we hear from the petitioner?
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. My name is Chris Schutte. I'm the representative today for the petitioner, Spinell Homes Incorporated. SHI owns these Moorhan subdivision addition number 2, lots 16 through 18, generally located on the northeast corner of Abbott Road in Elam. Purpose of the public hearing today is our request to amend the Anchorage 2040 land use plan map to change the classification of approximately 28,052 square feet from compact mixed residential medium to town center. This comprehensive plan map amendment is being requested to facilitate rezoning, which staff described in detail. Following approval of this request for concurrent approval of the comprehensive plan map and rezoning, Spinard Homes intends to initiate design and construction of a small office building and/or mixed-use office and residential development, depending on the outcome of tonight and on market forces. I appreciate the Commission taking the time to read through our admittedly very lengthy application packets for this request, and we believe that in light of the recommendation to deny issued by the Planning Department and the accompanying findings, we hope that we can use this time to explain to Commissioners where our thinking was in making this application and where we feel the Department may have gotten that application incorrect or interpreted that incorrectly. To start with, we believe that this area has seen a historical development of commercial pattern between Abbott Road, along Abbott Road, between New Seward and Lake Otis Parkway. This has happened over the past 30 plus years, and we believe demonstrates the appeal and the importance of this corridor for commercial development. Something that should be underlined because of the velocity with which commercial development has already occurred along this commercial corridor over the past even just 10 years, and the fact that there has been 0 residential development along the corridor. Excluding the subject parcels from town center land use designation was an error of the comp plan, we believe, and throughout our application we've demonstrated how our request satisfies the Title 21 criteria to amend the 2040 plan. Staff analysis in your packets, however, contends that our application does not satisfy even a single criterion on the comprehensive plan amendment and makes some questionable findings and statements that we would like to address tonight. The first of which from the department occurs before they even really begin to dive into the specific findings of our request, wherein they write, the current property owner has only owned these lots for 2 years. The statement puzzles us as we can find no code requirements or justification that dictates how many years an owner must hold property before requesting a comprehensive plan map or a rezone, nor do we find this statement particularly relevant to the application. Further, the staff analysis goes on to state, quote, the owner has no commercial development plans, so this is a speculative rezone, close quote. Our application contained 2 conceptual development proposals, neither of which we will admit is very far along in the development and design process, but that's specifically because development and design processes take time and cost money. And when you are in the early stages of entitlement work, those are risks that most developers are not willing to take. Furthermore, we would argue that essentially every comp plan amendment and upzone like we're requesting should be considered speculative, simply because we don't know how this commission is going to view the requests. However, pursuant to all the criteria contained in Title 21, specifically AMC 2103-070C2, we believe our comp plan amendment is necessary in order to address the criteria and satisfies the criteria in subsection 2A through 2E. The most compelling of this criteria is addressing a change in projections or assumptions from those on which the comp plan was based. Throughout their findings, the staff packet in response to this contends that existing conditions have not changed and that retaining the existing residential land base is the only way that our city will be able to supply housing. Through statements such as, quote, rezones from residential districts to the B3 district result in a net loss of residential units, and, quote, the need to retain the existing housing land base is more critical than ever, and, quote, converting residentially zoned lands to commercial increases the housing gap. The department is implying that any change to residential zoning will decrease the overall residential capacity of the municipality. However, we believe that statements such as these present land use as static and rezoning as a zero-sum game. It does not accurately reflect the evolving supply of density of residential development capacity. It relies upon outdated residential demand assumptions and proposes residential development types, namely apartments and or townhouses, that are so costly and infeasible that typically only heavily subsidized or incentivized projects are being built. To address the first concern, I'd like to state that zoning is not static. Indeed, this notion is prevalent throughout the Anchorage 2040 plan, which recognizes that both private landowners and the municipality itself will continue to rezone properties. Further, rezoning is not a zero-sum game in which one side, residential capacity, loses while the other side, commercial development, wins. A better way to think of land use, whether residential or commercial, is to envision it as a pie that is constantly changing in size. Removing one piece of that pie does reduce the total number of slices available, but it does not reflect the fact that the pie continues to grow and expand all the time. The size of our residential pie is constantly changing, and converting these parcels to commercial while removing these slices of the pie will not change the overall growth of the residential pie that's occurring. The area surrounding the subject parcels is already being built out at a higher residential density than the majority of Anchorage. Indeed, these subject parcels are located within the southern one-third of zip code 99507. This is the third highest population by zip code of the entire state. The population of 99507 is 38,739, puts it right behind population number 2, which is 99504, my zip code. We have a 42,161 population count, and the number 1 zip code in the state right now, which is 99654, Wasilla, population 61,000. Within zip code 99507, we continue to see increased residential development and density that it grows adjacent to or within driving distance of the subject parcels. Subdivisions continue to be developed just up the hill on Abbott Road, and new homes are constructed throughout that area. Additionally, this commission recently approved 2 cases, 2023-024 and 020, that allowed an increase in residential density about half a mile to the north along Lake Otis and Lower Road. Just to the south of these subject parcels, my client happens to own about 4.5 acres of R3SL land on Lake Otis, directly across the street from Hanshu Middle School. These are properties that will be developed. The properties are capable of supporting up to 56 units, excuse me. Perhaps most importantly, though, I'd like to highlight that the findings rely upon outdated residential demand assumptions. As summarized on page 8 of Anchorage 2040, they forecasted an average population growth rate of 0.8% annually, using 2015 as that baseline year. However, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the average annual population growth for Anchorage has been negative in nearly every year since that assumption was made. Despite these shifts in population growth, or frankly the decline that continues to occur in our population growth, averaging about negative 0.8%, the housing demand projections for Anchorage 2040 have not yet been adjusted. We also contend that the findings propose residential development types for our subject properties that are so costly and infeasible that nobody can do them. In their findings, the department suggests that there are apartment buildings at the southwest corner of Abbott Road and Toloff Street. These apartments are a good example of the style of development intended for the petition site. However, we feel this finding fails to acknowledge that the apartment buildings referenced at 9200 Independence Drive sit on a lot that is almost 110,000 square feet and does not share the same properties, the properties along Independence Drive to the south that are zoned B3 SL. In finding A1, the department contends Anchorage 2040 substantially increases the residential density of this existing R5 residential district. But what it fails to mention is that this density increase is meaningless, as R5 currently only allows single-family detached residential uses on lots 16 and 17 and would allow a duplex residential use on lot 18. Amending the comprehensive plan map to town center and approving the B3 zoning request, however, does allow the subject site to accommodate a wider assortment of commercial, residential, or mixed use that benefits the surrounding area without limitations of developing under the existing residential code that have stunted multifamily development Anchorage for the past decade and longer. In finding B1, the department speculates that the developers are buying residential land because it is cheaper than commercial land, rezoning that property and then selling it for a profit. We can find no evidence that this practice is occurring, and Spinell Homes, despite being viewed only as a home builder, does have a track record of completing several commercial developments within the past 5 years, and we included 2 conceptual designs with their application. It's the intent of the developer to construct on the subject parcels pending approval of our application for both the comp plan amendment and the rezone. Further, the department states that the B3 district is typically developed with straight commercial and almost never for housing. However, the latest B3 development completed by Spinell Homes was a 3-unit residential development in Spinard on B3 that was done in a way that's compatible with the surrounding area. What we have found in looking at the subject parcels and their residential development capacity is that they do not meet the criteria for a neighborhood that we want to build in. Moving beyond the state of housing supply and demand in Anchorage, we'd like to highlight the finding E, wherein the department argues that our request does not comply with one of the locational criteria of town centers in Anchorage 2040 because, quote, the site is not at the intersection of 2 arterial streets. This finding, however, we find is not supported by both the text of Anchorage 2040, which simply states town centers are areas at the intersection of arterial streets, and the existing land use plan map, which clearly shows town centers exist on both sides of a busy street and not at the intersections when you look at Huffman Road. The entire area between Old and New Seward are identified as a town center. Additionally, our comprehensive plan amendment recognizes the need for commercial development that occurs along transit corridors where transit-supported development designation is given to street corridors that are intended to have high ridership demand to support more frequent bus service. The implication from the staff packet is that this is a justification for keeping the residential designations. We find this to be an overly narrow interpretation of transit-supportive development. We believe the comprehensive plan growth supporting features apply to both residential and commercial uses. Transit corridors provide important connections to and from businesses and services, not just between residential uses. As page 60 of Anchorage 2040 notes, successful transit corridors can expand housing opportunities as well as commercial land uses to provide job opportunities and other daily needs closer to where employees can live. Anchorage 2040 understood that growth-supporting features are enhancements available to a wide variety of current and future zoning designations. Transit-supported development does not apply only to residential zoning or rezoning, but can be deployed in multiple zoning districts. And this flexibility is what's key to our case. Approving this comprehensive plan amendment and the concurrent rezone to B3 will make these parcels easier and therefore more likely to develop. We believe we have met all of the criteria in code. I won't repeat most of those because it's in our packet. We believe that the department's analysis of our two requests fails to adequately respond to the justifications we've provided. It unfairly presents commissioners with a biased view of the developer's intentions, and it fails to address the changes in projections or assumptions on which the entire comprehensive plan is based. Thank you. I'll reserve the rest of my time for rebuttal.
Thank you. Any questions for the petitioner? And you have 6 minutes and 33 seconds for rebuttal. Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could speak just a little more with respect to criteria A on page 2 of the staff packet and the change in projections or assumptions, or I guess criteria A in general, those little, I forget what Francis called them, it sounded like
Romanette.
Romanette, thank you. 1, 2, 3, or 4, and just clarify exactly what the applicant's position is with respect to those. I know you mentioned in your opening statement a little bit the sense of, I think with respect to 1, projections and assumptions. I saw in your application also a suggestion that maybe it was an error in the 2040 land use plan. And if you could just walk through exactly the components that you are suggesting are satisfied for those 4 Romanettes.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair. In the original application, we originally focused primarily on Romanette 4. I have to do my Roman numerals here. Identifying an error or omission. So in our initial application, there was extreme confusion and concern that during the drafting period of the Anchorage 2040 land use plan, there was not time and attention paid to the historical development patterns that occurred along Abbott Road between New Seward and Lake Otis, or that took into account the work that had been done 15 years prior during some initial planning exercises around developing a town center plan for the Abbott area. We do acknowledge that the Abbott Loop Town Center plan was never finalized, and that was never adopted or finalized, and that can't be debated. But we do believe that there was an interest in seeing that done, and that when the 2040 land use plan was created, it was an omission to not account for the planning thinking that had come before it, which was we need to look at this area as developing as a town center. That town center would have eventually been built out in such a way that it would have supported a higher intensity commercial use on the periphery where these properties are located as the internal part of the town center built up residentially. So we highlighted that initially as an omission. However, we do believe that the strongest concern and the strongest support for our application does fall under Romanette, 1, or the first one. And that's just simply not specific to our application, really. This is to applications and development happening in the residential space across the board. All of our assumptions need to be reevaluated. The population projections that underwrote the 2020 plan initially, that went into the thinking of the 2040 plan, might as well throw those out the windows because we did not foresee population decline that we've been experiencing. We did not foresee a global pandemic.
Thank you for that clarification.
You bet.
While we're waiting, I'll ask a question myself. Would a special limitation requiring a residential component of any future development be acceptable to the petitioner?
Thank you. Through the chair, the original request was for a straight B3 with no special limitations. That being said, as you see in your application packet, the petitioner is considering a mixed-use development on the property. So if there was discussion of special limitations on residential requirements, we would be open to discussing those.
Thank you. Commissioner Gardner?
Thank you. I guess a related question. Recognizing that these were just initial concepts that you included with your application, are there aspects of your mixed-use concept that would not be allowed in an R3A?
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you. Great question. So somebody earlier had mentioned that there are attachments in the original application packet that evaluated the various zoning designations available and the pros and cons, if you will, of what could be developed residentially. Ultimately, when looking at the site, given the size, given the surrounding area, and given the constraints of what's financially feasible in this market, it was determined that B3 was the zoning designation that granted the greatest flexibility for the development, whether that was straight commercial, some form of commercial mixed use with residential, or straight residential. So ultimately, when looking at the various zoning designations that were available, that's why we gravitated towards B3. I'll also underscore that one of the other reasons that B3 is appealing for those whole variety of uses, whether commercial or residential, is simply that B3 has the greatest flexibility when it comes to design standards and design criteria out of all the residential zoning districts. So in order to maintain the ease of developing a project and keeping costs down, frankly, we gravitated towards B3 and away from the other residential zoning districts that staff recommended.
So thank you for that answer. And I guess, I don't know to what extent you were able to more specifically answer if there are limitations present in the R3A that, for that concept, would give you particular concern for your ability to implement something like that.
Thank you. Through the chair, to begin with, this was envisioned originally as a commercial development. So that has always been the anchor use of the development ideas at the property. When you look at the other residential zoning districts that staff recommended, any of those that did allow a commercial component severely hampered or limited the amount of developable area that could be dedicated to a commercial use. So when you're looking at, say, a 25% of gross area, of floor area can be dedicated to commercial use, this is only a 28,000 square foot lot. We're not talking about a large development space. So you're beginning to severely restrict the amount of space that can be dedicated to commercial uses, thereby completely upsetting the economics of any development on the property. It was attachment N also, where we looked at some of the other zoning-based restrictions or limitations on the size of development, the footprint, number of buildings, et cetera, and show the least restrictive of all those was the B3.
Seeing no further questions, are there any members of the public wishing to testify? Yes, please come up. This is the time. And There's a little, there should be a sticky note there to turn the mic on. Yeah, and could you state and spell your name for the record before beginning? Thank you.
Red's on? Yeah. Greg Groneweg. Last name is spelled Groeneweg. What was there?
Yes, please go ahead. You have 6 minutes.
All right, thank you. I have a story. So I was born here in Anchorage, served on the fire department 40 years, driving fire trucks by that very location. And the photographer, the city, the law, I suppose, is speaking of is David Jensen, another lifelong resident and well-respected. And the story, Jensen saw what was happening in that neighborhood, like me. When you lived here this long, you tend to see how things change, how some improve and some don't. And that house had been used for not the greatest place, not the place you'd ever want to find someone you love. And he bought it and turned it into something that he thought would help that neighborhood survive. The neighborhood had trailers all in it, bit by bit, but they're owned individually, which is unusual. And what can happen is it can turn into a pocket of trouble for everybody, including the residents, or it can maybe rise to a little higher level. And that neighborhood, which I have a vested interest in, I'll share it with anybody, it has all that potential of falling to decay or becoming something better. Well, David tried to do that, and he developed property. I don't know if any ever drove by it. It was always well-maintained and just an uplifting, flowers and all that kind of stuff, trying to give a good introduction to the neighborhood. My wife, who is somewhat akin to an angel, wanted to have a little business in Anchorage here, and I bought the place from David Jensen, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And I've tried to carry on what David did, because we talked and found we were like souls, and I wanted to honor his 16 years he tried to do this the same way he did. So I did the same thing, kept the place looking nice, but the battle has become this. The lot on the other side of us is vacant. Nobody wants to build. I mean, it's residential property, and you could say you're losing residential sites, but you're not. There's nobody building on them, and they haven't for years, obviously. Since the beginning.
Sir, could you speak into the mic? There might be
I'm sorry,
folks listening. Thank you.
All right. And, where was I now? Is you have these vacant lots. They can call them residential and call them numbers. The code sounds so heartless because there are people who are in trouble, who are having hard times in their lives, and they're on that land and trying to buffer between the neighborhood of residences and the commercial area does well. You know, I mean, it is all around me. As I stand there in front of old David Jensen's place, it's commercial, and then we get up across Lake Otis, we get into churches and residential, right? But I turn and look up, it's commercial right up there with there's some medicals, different businesses in that place, the spa, and the McDonald's. You know what I mean? You look at the it's a huge now, it's the center there at the corner of Toloff and Abbott. And this is exactly what needed to happen. I don't know Mr. Spinelli. I mean, he seems like a nice enough fellow, and I think his idea is a good one. I'm glad someone's finally come forward to do that, because there's this stalemate of lots in decay, the lots that are residential, that I would never, my dad was a builder, I'd never build on them. That street is way too busy, and that's why nobody's done it. I mean, you think somebody would have speculated and bought a lot and built their own dream home, but not on that street. It's a nice area, but it's a very busy street, very noisy, honking horns, that kind of thing, and builders are sensitive to that, the good ones, and I think sounds like he is. Also, just a slight correction, all 3 letters that I just read while I was sitting there were in approval, not 2 in approval, 1 in denial.
I just wanted to clarify that. I think he might have messed up on the other one, I think is owned by that fellow is an Asian, and the interpretation isn't really good. He was trying to say he hasn't allowed anything to happen on that lot, and I know he hasn't, because he's thinking someday this has to become business. I mean, you look around you and it's business. And so that's a lot that's been tied up for years and years. The fellow on the other side of me, that lot's been owned by a fellow for years and years and years with the same thing too. He knows, hey, I'm surrounded by business. So it's in a stalemate is the problem. And whether some fellow wins a little or not, as the position I have held, which is discouraging, because the lots that were vacant used to just be vacant, but now they're vacant with another component where I have to have more locks. I've got videos of them coming there, the police chasing people, my place being broken into. And I know that's not a subject you're trying to address really here, but it is. It is. It's kind of like, I feel like if those vacant lots could be turned into what of course, I'd love to see like a coffee shop kind of thing like that. It'd be great. It'd be great for the neighborhood. And it'd be that buffer that we have right now between a bus stop, which unfortunately has a certain amount of also influence in the area, and the neighborhood, which is now it's vacant lots, and then you finally hit your first trailer or trailer that's come down for a house. Well, I'm sorry, I'm moving again. This is a great opportunity, and I'm not him or anybody else, but I'd love to see that area. It's Abbott, man. Make it look nice.
Thank you for your testimony.
All right. I'd love to answer a question.
I don't see any questions now. Thank you.
Nuts. All right.
There is a question. Commissioner Winchester.
I just thank you for your public testimony and your written comments. There's one sentence you had in there that kind of struck a case with me. I've spent quite a bit of time in this neighborhood over the same years. And you said in any case the present zoning has not met the public need and therefore they sit vacant.
Yeah.
So
That's the tragedy. They're sitting vacant, only that's not just a neutral, it's a minus.
So I was going through the land map a little bit, and I just want to see if this confirms as a neighbor. The ownership, a lot of the trailers, it seems like there's names that keep coming up again with concurrent lots in there. Have you noticed individual lots selling out and people kind of buying multiple lots in there?
Yep.
It seems 3 or 4 names that have kind of accumulated quite a bit of
mostly
that.
on Toloff.
Yeah.
Trailer, yeah, they just all of a sudden, and a certain style of house goes up. And that's another concern I have. If you don't open this up for a bigger option, is they'll just build another one of these homes that are just a huge garage, a small garage, and a window above, and they'll even build them as a single family, knowing that once that's been closed, a certificate of occupancy, if they still use them today, then they go to another department to apply for a thing where they can make them a duplex, which is how they were built in the first place. So apparently, maybe somebody's making money doing that. I am glad to see the trailers come down. Of course, they're not the safest environment to live in. So it is nice to see them being modernized. So that is better than the way they were, of course. But I would like to see people move in that have a stake, just like in my own neighborhood, B&B, and pretty soon, I don't have the families around me like I used to, and I miss that. So I don't know if I answered your question. It is going on Toloff mostly, and it's for that reason, because you can rent out the top and the bottom, that particular one. And I don't know that there's anything wrong with that, because there's still nice homes and stuff. Not maybe what I'd be my first choice. But
thanks for your testimony tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
And Commissioner George, did you also have a question?
I do. Sorry to take up so much time this evening, but I thank you for your testimony. I found it particularly compelling. I appreciate the
George.
perspective that you offer as a neighbor on this one. There's a map that's included for my colleagues on page 8 of G1, I think it is, that shows the current zonings along the street. Yours is the former David Jensen property, so that's an RO. And then just to the, I guess that's the east, there's a small office building that's there. It essentially is 2 lots into the neighborhood from the busy Abbott Street. And yours, I think, is 1 lot basically, in width. And so there's commercial that's allowed adjacent on either side of this lot. But the proposal here is for one that goes 3 lots into the neighborhood, but maintains, because the petitioner only has these sites, the residential zoning of the ones that all back up to it. Do you have any thoughts that regarding how far into a neighborhood like this commercial should extend?
It would be nice if it could go 6, but that means someone would have to be willing to sell their property at that point. I think commercial developers like, I believe Walgreens once took a look at the area and they would have bought David's. He was willing to sell. And but they had one holdout. One woman did not want to, not be with her flowers. So that's fine. It's her right, her choice, and it didn't happen. But that, I think, was a run at 3 lots. 2 rows of them, so 6. Chambers is the fellow who developed, or at least the broker involved in that medical building down there, and I don't know how he got that rezoned, but I'm glad he did. I think everybody is. It just gives you that buffer against a busy street like that with foot traffic. And unfortunately, some of the foot traffic you got to watch out for. So we're that buffer at this point, but I would love to have a partner, and I guess what I would hope, I would hope that as time goes on, if this fellow can change his part, get that ball rolling, that one of those people who wrote in was the fellow who's waiting for it to turn business. So I expect he's got an idea of something he would like to do there. I don't know if he owns 1 or 2, but that puts it to Chambers property, which is already commercial. I would like to see them all. Me, I don't really care. Okay. My wife loves her little house and runs her little business, and it doesn't matter to us. But
thank you. I appreciate your perspective.
Sure. And the other side, same thing. I'd like those 5 lots to turn B3 so they can be used instead of vacant, attracting what that does. And I don't want to see anybody build a residential on there either. I'm sorry, but it would just be a mistake. I wouldn't want to live there. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to testify?
Good evening. My name is Brandon Marcotte. That's Marcott. I live at 1956 Sonoma Crest Circle in South Anchorage. I am a registered civil engineer and I live and travel through this area on a daily basis. I have experience with rezone applications, having worked on a few residential and commercial rezone projects within the municipality over the past 15 or so years. A brief review of the zoning map that I see on page 35 of the G2 packet perfectly illustrates the predominant zoning along the Abbott Road corridor, which is the B3 zone. Anyone who lives in or near this area understands that this is a heavily trafficked commercial corridor providing access to Fred Meyer's, cars, fast food restaurants, fueling stations, eye care centers, laundromats, professional service industries, medical offices, the list goes on. The staff report also provides the intended purpose of the B3 district at the bottom of page 4 of the same packet, G2. When you read the definition of the B3 district, one can visualize how the proposed rezone fits perfectly within the existing commercial businesses along this corridor. I think it's very important to note that the B3 district allows for residential use. Page 19 of the application identifies the various densities possible with the B3 zone, and mixed use is also a possibility. In fact, the B3 zone requires less open space per dwelling unit than either of the R2M or R3/R3A zones. Less open space means more density. I'll repeat this again, it's important. In fact, the B3 zone requires less open space per dwelling unit than either of the R2M zone or the R3/R3A districts. Less open space requirements means more DUA or at least more bedrooms. It's my professional opinion that the B3 is not only the highest and best use for this land, but also the most appropriate given the existing commercial activity in this area. In closing, please take into consideration that not a single reviewing agency has objected to this rezone request. Not only have little to no negative comments from the public been received, but the Abbott Loop Community Council submitted a letter of support for this application, which is a very rare occurrence for rezone cases. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to provide testimony, and I'm here to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions. Is there anyone else wishing to testify? Seeing no one, the public hearing is closed. The petitioner has about 6 minutes for rebuttal.
Thank you. Not much came up during the questions and the public testimony that need rebutting, but I will just conclude by reiterating that we believe that the highest and best use of this property is to have it rezoned in such a way that development is feasible, development that will be impactful and meaningful to the surrounding area. We appreciate the time and energy that staff put into working with us up to this point. Even though we did disagree, we found the process very engaging and very helpful. We hope that the Commission will find our application does meet all of the criteria required to approve this comprehensive plan amendment and the subsequent rezone. We look forward to seeing this part of the Abbott Road commercial corridor develop in such a way that residents, like you heard earlier, can enjoy whatever uses or tenants end up occupying this space. And with that, I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and my apologies. Now the public hearing is closed. What is the will of the body? A motion by Commissioner Strike, seconded by Commissioner George. Commissioner Strike, would you like to, no? Is this, oh. Right, now someone may make a motion if they would like. Moved by Commissioner Eber. Would anyone like to second this motion? Seconded by Commissioner Winchester. Commissioner Eber, would you like to state your motion?
Yes, I move in case 2023-0096 to recommend to the Anchorage Assembly approval of the request to change the Anchorage 2040 land use plan designation of 3 lots from compact mix residential medium to town center.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would. After reviewing the packet and listening to public testimony, I intend to support the motion for a variety of reasons. No review agencies were opposing or against it. The adjacent lots, most adjacent lots next to, or 2 adjacent lots next to it, have been rezoned from the R5 zoning previously, so I think that intends to support what the community prefers. 2 of the 3 written comments supported it, with 2 people in person supporting it. I could go on, but I think that's the gist of it.
Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? Commissioner Strike?
Thank you, and to the chair. I am tending to support this motion as well. As noted, the Abbott Loop Community Council not only submitted a letter, it should be noted the vote was 25-3 on their vote. And I think that says something. And to steal Jim Winchester, Commissioner Winchester, and Mr. Gregg, who presented earlier, they left a resounding comment. The present zoning has not met community needs. And that is an area that I'm leaning in on this support. And another piece to this is that the 2040 plan. A lot has happened in this community in just the last 5 to 6 years. And the 2040 plan, I believe, was put into place at the latter half of 2016. We're seeing a community area that they're looking at a school closure at the Abbott Loop. We're looking at a whole change in demographics that has occurred, and that in certain areas of this city, we've got to be flexible and look at a living document as the 2040 plan to a degree that I think there's times where the commission and the city needs to step up when they see an opportunity to see additional growth and development take place. So from that aspect, I will support this motion.
Commissioner Gardner?
Thank you. I think this is a hard case for me. I'm inclined to not support the motion, and I'll see if I can put my thoughts in a cogent sequence here. I think Commissioner Strike's comments about the 2040 plan kind of get to the heart of this case and how we handle that and what we do with that. If we look at approval criteria A, I don't understand the applicant to really be focusing on the current land use designation being an error or omission, and I didn't find that particularly convincing myself, so I think it really goes down to the change in projections or assumptions on which that comp plan was based. Commissioner Strike mentioned that's maybe 6 years ago now. I think that's something roughly accurate for when that was put into place. There was a lot of work and effort that went into that, and I think I'm hesitant to throw that out, particularly given the strong emphasis on maintaining options for housing in our code. I don't find particularly compelling the notion that B3 permits residential uses. That's certainly true as a matter of code, but I think a lot of the discussion here contemplated, the part of the justification offered is that this is a commercial corridor. I think commercial uses are what are really ultimately intended here, and I don't think it makes sense to rely on that to justify this change while at the same time pointing to the ability to have residential in the B3. And then that leaves us just with, how do we as a commission evaluate what maybe changes to the projections or assumptions that underlie the 2040 plan? I personally don't feel competent to really, or that I have information to make that call myself. I would be happy to call on the assembly maybe for some additional guidance on what we do with that. It certainly seems like our population numbers are not growing as contemplated at that time, but just anecdotally for myself, I'm not an expert in the real estate market, but I know that prices are still high for housing, both to purchase and to rent, and I don't know what to do with that myself. But I think without more, there's not enough to my mind to move away from the community effort that went into the 2040 plan. So that's where I am.
Commissioner Winchester?
It seems like I'm going with whoever was the last speaker in terms of how I feel about this case. It's a tough neighborhood. It's surrounded to the north on 88th. There's I-2 in there. There's some grandfathered lots in there, businesses mixed in with houses, new houses that don't match the flavor of the old mobile home. But at the end of the day, I wonder if staff would feel differently if these two lots were congruent along Abbott Road versus setback along Elam Street, where it would be more of a buffer along Abbott. So You know, I'm at the point where if we're really concerned about complying with 2040 would be a special limitation fix to require some residential on there, and you know, I would be open to that too, if that's the will of the body to get this. Either way, I would find without prejudice, so this could maybe come back before us sooner than 2 years.
Anyone further wishing? Yes, Commissioner George.
Thank you. I appreciate Commissioner Winchester's comments. I too struggled with that, and that's why I asked the question earlier about how far into a neighborhood is it appropriate to change the zoning and create a plan amendment when it's got R5 on all the other sides. For me, you know, this creates B3 without an SL, which is actually the exception in that area, particularly when you're increasing your height by 15 feet and it's the southern 3 lots in the neighborhood. You're going to have an impact on the neighbors behind it to the north. That are all, for the most part, mobile homes. They're not 45 feet tall. We're going forward by approving not having any limitations on this. And Mr. Jensen's property years ago had limitations on it to make sure that there was an appropriate buffer there. I also concur that the lots directly to the east, remaining R5, is an interesting paradox that we have here. You know, we're approving a plan amendment that almost seems like it ought to apply to the other properties that abut this road, but we only have the petitioner here before us to consider. And, I don't know how to rectify that. Do we just set a precedent and say whoever else wants to come forward, this is kind of where we're thinking? I really don't know the solution to it, but I think it would be interesting precedent to set our, B3 without any special limitations in this case. So, thank you.
And maybe I will speak now. I do find this particularly difficult. I would also maybe say to the entire commission that anyone can put an amendment on the floor to consider a special limitation. That's entirely within anyone's purview. I'm not sure, I think to follow up on some comments from Commissioner Gardner, I'm not sure that I'm necessarily convinced either that a change in projections or assumptions is compelling enough in this case. It's a rather slippery slope, I think, that the commission could find ourselves in to say that in this case when we haven't said that before, and when I think we're all very aware that there's an incredible housing shortage and a need to find more solutions to increase housing development. That being said, I do think that I am not entirely convinced by staff's kind of holding the line against any rezones to B3, saying kind of even one rezone of one residential lot to B3 is dangerous. I think since Anchorage 2040 was passed, we've seen a lot of code changes to the end of mixed-use development. And I come back to the discussion we've had tonight about how B3 can allow for greater residential development than some of the existing zoning. You're all waiting to see which way I've decided, and I am not sure quite yet. But I would just say right now that I am leaning towards supporting this, but would be more comfortable with an SL requiring some residential. Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you. I guess this is, I don't know if this would be not so much a finding directly to the motion before us, but I guess maybe just a clarification partly for myself and the commission that I guess we're looking at just the change in the land use plan designation at the moment, right? And then we will need to have a second motion with respect to the zoning change itself, which is maybe just a question for staff. To the extent special limitations are on the table, it would be zoning change that would be the appropriate place to include those?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. sorry. Just also a finding I meant to include earlier and forgot to. Apologize to keep this running. Just that under the current land use designation, it does support zoning that is different from the current zoning designation that does permit commercial uses in addition to the residential. I just meant to include that earlier.
Commissioner Strike.
Thank you, and through the chair. I have no idea how to put forth a amendment in what I'm thinking of on the limitations to incorporate residential or housing on this site. But the petitioner did notate during the discussion, I think he was asked by either the chair or another member, if they would consider such a limitation to incorporate it. And if applicable, might we hear back from the petitioner as to what that amendment to special limitation might look like in their eyes? No offense, if it's any good, maybe we'll plagiarize it. Is that appropriate? And if so, I'll yield.
Yes, I think so.
Thank you. And through the chair, wonderful discussion. So in short, I think the question you were attempting to ask Commissioner Strike is what type of residential-based special limitation would the petitioner entertain? Okay, he's nodding yes. So in short, the original request was unfettered B3, but given the discussion today and the interest that we have expressed in pursuing mixed use, if it pencils out, we would entertain an appropriately worded special limitation on the zoning case that requires residential development component as a condition of approval for the B3. As far as any specificity beyond that, I don't have a lot of recommendations for what you could make, but I will offer this, that as a starting point, when you look at the existing lot sizes and the existing zoning today, the maximum number of units you'd be able to build is 4. And the math on that was 1 single family each on lots 16 and 17. And because of the larger size of lot 18, you might be able to squeeze a duplex on there. I wouldn't advise it myself because it's not that big of a lot, but that's what the code dictates. So as a starting point to your discussion, I put that out there.
As a point of clarification, I will add that I believe we just heard from staff that any special limitation would be for the second case. So I would recommend that we have any further discussion, call for a vote in case 2023-0096, and then move on to that discussion if the body chooses. Is there any further discussion on this case? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. That vote passes. And I see we have a motion from Commissioner Strike. Commissioner Strike, would you like to state your motion?
Yes, and to get things moving here, I move in case 2023-0097 to recommend to the Anchorage Assembly approval of the request to rezone 3 lots from R5 Low Density Residential District to B3 General Business District.
Thank you. That was seconded by Commissioner Eber. Commissioner Strike, would you like to speak to your motion?
A couple points. First off, all testimony that we heard tonight was in favor of such a move, and that we saw both support from both the community as well as the community council at Abbott Loop, who moved at a vote of 25-3 to push this type of rezoning and development in place. And that the biggest component here that I've seen is that the present zoning has not met the community needs. And as we look to develop property that has gone vacant, empty on this corridor, is it the perfect solution in this area? That we've heard of issues regarding height limitations, and we've heard of issues regarding the residential abandonment in the area. And so after discussion here, I think it's appropriate that we put a special limitation in place for this site if zoning is to proceed forward.
Is there anyone else wishing to make such an amendment or to speak to this case?
If appropriate, I'll take a stab at making that amendment for special limitation, but I think it has to be voted separately or in conjunction with the motion itself, so I'll leave that to the chair.
Yes, I think you can also make the amendment, but we have to do it separately.
As part of this motion, I would move a special limitation that any component of the zoning for this site also to incorporate a residential component in the zoning, comma. My concern with that statement as stipulated is very broad. And I don't know that it meets the criteria for a special limitation in and of itself without some teeth. And so for that, I would look to staff to identify appropriate wording for that type of limitations. Simply to say a component of residential in this zoning, as we've heard, doesn't seem to have the teeth necessary. And further, I would ask the staff, is there a component in there that we can restrict the height? Because the validation of going in 3 lots, 45 feet from a required 30 being allowed, it seems like there should be a gradation there if we're going to pursue that type of zoning change. So those seem to be the 2 components that I heard of redress or address by the other commissioners. And so I'm looking to staff for recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Strike. In regards to a special limitation limiting building height because the B3 allows greater height, I would caution the commission about making that special limitation because these are small lots. They're actually 3 individual lots. It's not 1. So if there's a special limitation that requires there to be a residential component, and there's a special limitation that limits the height, then you might be constraining the developer's ability to provide that housing unit if they decide to go vertical. So just consideration on that. I've been at this for 17 years now, and I've seen special limitations created on the night of a meeting that resulted in the property continuing to be stuck. And because, it can happen that way. I don't have a thought out special limitation on requiring a residential You know, usually with special limitations requiring residential, you say that a minimum number of dwelling units required, or minimum dwelling units per acre. And I really don't know what would work here with there being 3 separate lots, all under common ownership. I guess, you know, if he were to combine the lots and you required, the special limitation required minimum of, you know, 4 dwelling units, but that's for the district. I mean, in the future, it could be subdivided a different way. It's just a really hard thing to figure out. I don't have a suggestion right now. If I did, I'd tell you.
Well, in order to keep this moving forward, let me take a stab at here too on the special limitations, and that we would, the special limitation to require a residential component in the zoning equating to 2 of the 3 lot requirements. So if 4 dwelling units are required per lot, that would mean that combined, I would be looking for a minimum 8 dwelling units as part of the 3 lot component. And with that stated, I don't know if I stated that clearly or not, but I would look at the petitioner to see what type of hardship or issues that might incur, and if this is but a starting point.
Thank you. Through the chair. Just so that I understand Commissioner Strike's amendment correctly, it is to require a minimum of 8 residential units developed as part of this rezone approval. Was that correct?
That was my intent, and my intent for saying that was I just took 2 of the 3 lots at 4 each.
Thank you. So through the chair, I think that is a little too high for the size of these parcels, even when combined, if it were into a single parcel. For comparison's sake, these 3 parcels together are approximately the same size as the parcel where Rustic Goat is located. Rustic Goat can only accommodate only accommodates 4 units currently, and even then, it's a little tight. So my recommendation would be consider what the current zoning allows, which is a single-family home on lots 16 and 17, and a duplex, up to a duplex, on lot 18, which would give you 4 dwelling units.
And I believe the petitioner had also proposed at 1.6.
No, through the chair, I don't believe I did, and if I said 6 at one point, I may have misspoken. I'm sorry. That must be a typo. My apologies if that's in there.
Well, it's not a typo. It's a map. It's a.
And the conceptual site plan. Yes.
Conceptual site plan.
Yes. So again, that was conceptual in nature. After spending more time with designs and more specifically spending time with the layout that is configured at the Rustic Goat property, the feasibility of a larger footprint given the configuration of this rectangular collection of parcels becomes problematic. So I would, as a suggestion, I would say that 4 is workable for having both a residential development and component and an office or commercial serving the neighborhood.
Well, we did just get rid of a lot of parking.
Thank you. Yeah, through the chair, thank you for that. However, most people, when they design and develop residential developments, still try to include parking.
So I will take a stab at here to amend the 6 down to 4 units. And I think that gets, we still have a road ahead of us here, and they still have to put a plan together that goes through the city and goes through the staff. So I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. So would you mind? Yes, Commissioner Eber.
So I have another question for the petitioner. What is your do you intend to replat these lots into one larger lot? If passed?
Yeah, through the chair, I actually can't answer that at the moment
Okay.
because the owner hasn't specified.
Okay.
Depends on the outcome. Thank you.
Moving back to the amendment, would anyone like to second the amendment? And Commissioner Strike, may I try to state your amendment for the record? I believe it's to add a special limitation requiring 4 units of residential. A minimum of 4 units of residential, sure. And that was seconded by Commissioner Pullis. Commissioner Strike, would you like to speak to that amendment?
No, I will stick with the same amendment. I'm going to support that because my goal here is to see development take place where none has been able to take place in the past. And we can be on a precipice leaning one direction or another, but doing nothing for too long has seemed to be an option. And that's not what this city needs. We need to keep moving forward and see some development in the right places, in the right corridors, and with the right projects. And there's a lot of tools out there to make this the right project in this heavily dense corridor along Abbott Loop. So for that, I'm supporting the motion.
Commissioner George?
Thank you. Through the chair, I appreciate the amendment, and I struggle with how to craft it, and I suspect that's why we have the department in the queue as well. We're looking at a situation where there's one housing unit that's potentially going away, and you might not have any in its place. So I do like the idea of maintaining at least what housing is there. However many is appropriate, I leave to the wisdom of the body. But Commissioner Eber hit the nail on the head when she asked if there's a plating action forthcoming. And right now there is not one before anyone. It has not been drafted or submitted, and it might never come to fruition. So the way that in a special limitation would apply, it would say a minimum of 4 dwelling units, but is that on each parcel? What happens if they divest of one of the parcels to the north? Or if they don't develop and it goes, they sell the property? You would effectively be looking at a requirement of 4 units over 3 lots. How do you do that? There's a lot of questions where it's very difficult to craft this on the fly. And in a perfect world, I would have maybe sought additional input, but we are here now where we are. I struggle to find a way to effectively apply this intention of the body that I think there seems to be support for. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
And maybe I will skip Commissioner Gardner and go to staff first, just in case staff wants to comment on that.
Through the chair, I was going to make the same points that Commissioner George made, that there's 3 lots, and so the special limitation requiring 4 dwelling units be developed. I think there should be an effective clause also required that the 3 lots be combined into 1. Without the effective clause, someone like me or the property owner has a hard time administering or following the special limitation. Thank you.
Commissioner Strike?
Yeah, thank you for that from the staff, and I see some feverishly typing in there. And so can we add that comment in, what did you call it, an effectuation clause?
It's called an effective clause, that the 3 properties be subdivided into 1.
So the condition to this amendment is that there be a further replat that takes place combining all 3 lots into 1 in order for that to be effective. Now, question. We've got 2 motions. We've got one that does the effective clause with the adding the additional housing, and then we have the rezoning taking place. But can one not, can any of that take place but for there's been a replat of the 3 lots? We kind of have a chicken and the egg situation going here.
Commissioner Gardner?
I guess I don't see an easy way out of this either, but a question for staff, and I don't know if this is also just not workable, but if you've seen, I mean, it occurs to me that really, I think with the property owner and is interested in addressing the concerns with respect to the presence of residential units included in some fashion in this development, but as Commissioner Strike mentioned, we're at a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, and I don't know if there's a mechanism that we could include as a special limitation for some sort of administrative review that just creates a process for continuing discussion as the property is developed with the planning department, where we could include, in some fashion, capture the intent that there be as the property is developed for residential units. Is there anything that you might suggest that could reasonably capture that?
Through the chair, Mr. Gardner, that's a good question, and I don't believe that a wording added to this the ordinance requiring an administrative site plan review or some other review by the planning department, I don't think that adds value. I don't think that it would achieve your intent. Separately, I wanted to point out a piece of information on page 45 of the G2 packet. So in the G2 packet, the rezone packet, on page 45, there is an as-built to the property, and so it shows you the 3 lots, and the petitioner had stated that there's, the lots aren't really large, and that I believe they said that, and that the configuration of lots, and I think with the idea that Mr. Schutte was conveying is that there's not a lot of room to work with, and there is a well house on the property that further limits the development of the property, the developability of the property. So looking at constraints on the property, while it is a corner lot, I don't believe that state DOT will ever allow access directly from lot 18 onto Abbott Road. All traffic must go out onto Elim. And the takeaway here, what I'm trying to say is that there are some constraints on the property. You'll only be able to drive from these properties, should they be replatted into one, out onto Elim. And there is a building that can't be moved on the property. That's the well house. It cannot, that well services the whole neighborhood from Toloff to Golovin to 88th to Abbott, and all the houses and businesses that well, it's a private water utility. I don't know what to do with that, but it just seems like it's an important piece of information. I'll leave it at that.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. That amendment passes. No? That amendment fails. All right, we are on to the main motion. Before we finish voting, we'll have some further discussion. Commissioner Gardner?
Yeah, apologies. I meant to include some findings on the main motion here. I don't support this motion. I think I would have, had there been a way to get some sort of residential requirement in there that I felt like made sense. And given the way that this is structured with 3 lots, I found, it sounded like what we had proposed was too limiting ultimately. And to the extent that this doesn't pass, I would be open to including it without prejudice to maybe look further at ways to make this work with some sort of residential requirement, as we had discussed. Without that, I don't, in my view, think that this meets a couple of the approval criteria, including, let's see, compatibility with surrounding zoning and development. There is some commercial uses, but particularly on this side of Abbott, they have some special limitations, and I think just an open-ended B3 without any restrictions isn't really compatible with the adjacent neighborhood, given the potential uses that can be applied by right as a B3, and the height of a B3. I don't think that fits with the adjacent neighborhood. I had another thought, but it has escaped my head, so I will leave it at that.
Commissioner Strike?
Yeah, Commissioner Gardner, thank you for those comments as well. And without the amendment, I feel that, and as convoluted as it may be, I think that the petitioner sees some of the possible directions that this can go. But for this particular motion now before us without the amendment, I don't believe I can support it without having assurances of the residential limitations placed. But also that by going without prejudice, and I think we've had 3 parties now stipulate that, it gives the petitioner a path forward, I believe, with the knowledge and what they're seeing from this commission in today's presentation of possible paths forward. And I'll yield.
Is there anyone else further wishing to speak to this motion?
Through the chair. Sorry, I didn't get in the queue there.
Commissioner George?
At the end of the day, there's a lot of arguments on both sides of this one, and I struggle with it. But I look at these lots that have sat on this corner for decades and decades and decades. And you have someone who comes along who wants to develop them. And we've approved the plan amendment. So it's a tough decision, but if there isn't a requirement for residential zoning, is that enough to overcome allowing it to come to fruition, like I said? So thank you.
Maybe I'll add as well that I think I am sort of with Commissioner George on this one, where it really is hard. In the 5 years I've been on this commission, I can't really think of more than one, or really any times that we've used special limitations. They generally aren't a tool that we've found to be able to use in this setting. That being said, I think that's for a number of reasons, and perhaps this would have been a good situation in which I would have liked either staff or the petitioner to have brought us some language. It's very, very hard for the commission to sit here and devise SLs that work in very specific instances like this, which is why we don't use them, and because it's very hard to see what the effects will be after they leave this room. That being said, I think that I still am convinced that this meets the majority of the approval criteria. We've heard compelling testimony about neighborhood characteristics and the low impact this would have on surrounding neighbors, so I'm still inclined to support this. Commissioner Polis.
As the only one who hasn't chimed in yet, I felt the need I should probably get my opinion out there too. I I came into this thinking there was no way I was going to get talked off of Land Use Policy 14 and saving residential neighborhoods. I listened to the public, and it seems to be pretty well supported. I looked at the land map, which I noticed recently the whole neighborhood is surrounded by some type of buffering other district, except for right here at this one location. Basically, if this went through, I think there'd be 2 runs on the side of a street that weren't the commercial zoning. So based on, just positive reception from the community council wrote a letter supporting this, and the fact that everywhere else around this neighborhood has a buffer around it, I feel like it's more important to maybe let this one develop and buffer the neighborhood, which may increase the density within the neighborhood in the future. That's just an opinion, but that's what I saw looking at the zoning map.
Anyone, Commissioner Gardner?
Yes, sorry, this is really just a question for staff. It seems like this may be set to pass, which I could live with, but if there were interest in discussing further potential special limitations, one of the concerns I had with the prior one was that it kind of imposed a requirement that hadn't been discussed. I think we asked directly the applicant about joining the lots, and he hadn't had an opportunity to discuss that, so wasn't really able to speak to that. And is there an option to potentially kind of table the vote until some of those discussions could take place, and we could consider, I think as Commissioner Krishna suggested or expressed an interest in having some special limitations proposed to us, given the concerns that have been expressed?
Through the chair, yes, that's a possibility. It looks like one option, one road may be to approve the motion recommending approval of the rezone without any special limitations, to craft a special limitation, with an effective clause that the lots have to be replatted, because that would be probably the only way to take existing platting lots and then require residential development, because where would you apply? Because it's creating a new district, right? So it seems like there has to be an effective clause to combine them into one lots, and then a requirement of certain minimum number of residential units to be provided on that newly created single tract or developable lot. Or the third that you just raised, which is to postpone to next month, and for the applicant to return with in written form, a memo stating a special limitation that they would offer as a suggestion. I mean, the planning department doesn't, anyway, you understand the point.
So I guess I would throw a motion on the table to postpone a vote until next month, I guess, to have an opportunity for the applicant to propose some special limitations that would work, that they would be comfortable with, and that address an interest in having some residential property included as well. So.
Through the chair, staff, is next month a good date certain to?
If Mr. Schutte thinks that that's enough time, yeah.
Motion by Commissioner Gardner to postpone to November, seconded by Commissioner George. Commissioner Gardner, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, just I think that in the course of the discussion this evening, there was an interest, which I think the applicant was open to, in having some sort of special limitation to include a requirement for some small minimum number of residential units on the lot, but we haven't had an opportunity to fully explore, given the particular context of these lots, something that might make sense, so to provide an opportunity for the applicant to propose something.
Commissioner Polis?
I intend to support this motion. I had tried to team up with Commissioner Strike to maintain at least the current residential rates of the lot. So I think this is a good motion, and if the applicant can come back with something, this would work out.
Commissioner Strike?
Now, this is going way out in left field, but when I'm hearing that a replatting is going to be in order, ultimately, and how quickly can a replat be processed? Because this commission can hear replats.
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, that's not, it's a separate land use entitlement and process. It would have to be an application for it and a public hearing, or maybe it could be approved administratively by the, well, I don't want to say, but there's a process for subdivisions, and it's not something that would be reviewed or decided upon this evening or at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. That motion passes. And we will see everyone back here next month. That only leaves a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Polis, seconded by Commissioner Strike. Any objections? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.